They call me Vaelos Krin. Designation Ordo Xenos. Savant Tertius. Attached to the research cadre of Inquisitor Hallex Morn. I am recording this from Detention Cell 19 of the Tricorn Palace on Scintilla. They have given me a lumen quill and 3 data slates. They have told me to write everything, every detail, every sensation, every rank, every rung of that screaming green ladder I climbed inside my own mind for 11 standard months. They want to know what it is like to be them. I can still taste the spore musk. I can still feel the thunder of a million fungoid hearts synced to one impossible rhythm. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where all Orkoid life starts. In the dirt, in the dark, in the wet. Let me start at the very bottom. I was 32 standard years old when Inquisitor Morn requisitioned me for Project Emerald Mirror. I had spent 9 years cataloging Xenos artifacts in the vaults beneath the Bastion Serpentia on Hydrofer. 9 years of labeling things I did not understand. 9 years of breathing recycled air that tasted faintly of ozone and old parchment. I was quiet. I was thorough. I was unremarkable, as Morn himself wrote in his selection notes. I know because I read them later, when everything was already too late. The project was simple in concept. Morn had recovered a psycho-empathic resonator from the wreck of an Ork Krooza that had been drifting in the Coronis expanse for an estimated 600 years. The device was crude, as all Ork technology is crude, a lump of metal and wire, and something that pulsed with a sickly green luminescence that had no identifiable power source. But it was not just metal. The tech priests determined that it contained a crystallized lattice of Orkoid neural spore material, essentially a fossilized fragment of Waaagh energy, preserved in a physical matrix. Morn theorized that a sufficiently disciplined human psyker, one with the training to observe without participating, could use the resonator to ride the Waaagh field, to experience Ork consciousness from the inside, to understand their hierarchy not as external observers but as participants. I am not a psyker, not really. I tested at epsilon level during my scholar evaluation, barely a flicker, enough to sense mood, enough to feel the shape of a room, not enough to be tithed to the black ships. Morn said this was precisely what he needed. A mind sensitive enough to receive, too weak to project. A passenger, not a driver. He was wrong about the passenger part. The first immersion was on the 9th of Tertius, 817.M41. I remember the date because it was the last day I was entirely myself. He strapped me into a modified psycho hood in Laboratory 7, a basement room with walls lined in 3 centimeters of psi-dampening ceramite. Morn's pet tech priest, Magos Vulcan, placed the resonator against my temple. It was warm, warmer than metal should be, and it hummed, not audibly, but somewhere behind my teeth. We will begin with the lowest stratum, Morn said. He was standing behind 3 centimeters of armor glass, watching me on a pict feed. The Snotling, observe, record, do not engage. Vulcan activated the device, and I was gone. Not gone, replaced. Every sensation, every thought, every particle of Vaelos Krin dissolved like sugar in boiling water. In its place, there was something new, something wet, something very, very small. The Snotling. The first thing I understood, and I use the word understood loosely, because a Snotling does not truly understand anything, was warmth. Damp warmth, like being inside a mouth. The ground beneath me was soft and yielding, fungal. I could feel it with skin that was not my skin. Thin, green, clammy. My hands, if you could call them hands, were the size of a grown man's thumbs. My fingers were stubby and perpetually sticky with spore residue. I weighed perhaps 4 kilograms. I could see, but only just. The world was enormous. Everything towered. Stalks of Orkoid fungus rose around me like hab spires, their caps dripping with bioluminescent moisture that cast everything in a dim green glow. The air was thick and warm, saturated with moisture and the heavy earthy stench of decomposition and new growth. I later learned the term for these places, spawning pits, but to the Snotling I was riding, it was simply everywhere. It had no concept of somewhere else. The mind was almost nothing, a flicker, an impulse engine running on the lowest possible output. Hunger, warmth-seeking, an awareness of things that were bigger, which was everything, and a single overwhelming imperative that pulsed like a heartbeat through what passed for its consciousness. Don't get squished. That was it. That was the entire inner life of a Snotling. A half-meter-tall bundle of green skin and enormous eyes, and a desperate animal need to not be underfoot. The Snotling I was riding, and I use riding because I had no control, only perception, was tending a fungus patch. Its fingers worked with surprising deftness, turning over the spongy growths, checking for the fat pale grubs that squigs would later feed on. It did not know why it was doing this. The knowledge was simply there, encoded in its cells, a genetic memory from the brain boys who had designed the entire Orkoid ecosystem millions of years before. Other Snotlings scurried nearby, dozens of them. They chittered at each other in high-pitched squeals that were not language, not truly, at something more primitive. Alarm calls, territorial chirps, and a sound I can only describe as giggling, a shrill hiccuping noise they made when they found an especially large grub. Then a shadow fell over us, a Gretchin, perhaps a meter tall. To the Snotling, it might as well have been a Warlord Titan. The Gretchin's foot came down on a neighboring Snotling with a wet crunch. It did not even look down. It was carrying a bucket of something foul-smelling and muttering to itself in guttural low Orcish, and the death of a Snotling simply did not register as an event worth noticing. My Snotling's reaction was instantaneous. No grief, no anger, no recognition that a member of its kind had just been killed. Just a spike of animal terror and a frantic scramble deeper into the fungus bed. The fear lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then it faded. Then the Snotling resumed tending the fungus. I was inside that consciousness for what Morn later told me was 2 hours and 14 minutes. It felt like an eternity of almost nothing, a life of mushroom tending, of dodging feet, of occasionally nibbling on a fungal stalk, and feeling a brief pure surge of satisfaction that constituted the only joy a Snotling would ever know. No ambition, no malice, no self-awareness worth the name, just existence at the lowest possible tier, a thing that lived and died and was mourned by no one, not even its own kind. When Vulcan pulled me out, I was weeping. I did not know why. Perhaps because I had touched something so small, so insignificant, so utterly beneath the notice of the galaxy, and it was alive. It had warmth and hunger and fear, and it did not matter. Not to anyone, not even to itself. Morn gave me 2 days to recover. Then we went up a rung. The Gretchin. The difference was staggering. If a Snotling's consciousness is a guttering candle, a Gretchin's mind is a small, sputtering engine, crude and unreliable but functional. I was inside a groat, called as near as I could translate, Snickwort. He was attached to a warband on Jagga, one of the great orc worlds in the Charadon sector. He stood just over a meter tall. He weighed perhaps 20 kilograms. His skin was a lighter green than I expected, almost yellow at the extremities, and covered in a thin layer of perpetual grime. Snickwort could think, not well, not clearly, but there was an internal monologue of sorts, a running stream of observation and calculation that a Snotling simply could not achieve. It was dominated by 2 concerns. First, avoiding being hit. Second, finding opportunities. The Gretchin mind is a survival engine. It calculates angles of escape. It catalogues the moods of nearby orcs, the way a prey animal catalogues the movements of predators. Snickwort knew, with a precision that surprised me, that the knob called Gutsmack was in a foul temper because his shooter had jammed during the morning's target practice. He knew that the path behind the mech boy's workshop had a loose panel that could be slipped through if pursuit was close. He knew that the rumherd, Grablag, had a blind spot on his left side because a squig had taken his ear off 3 cycles ago. This was not courage. It was not intelligence in the way the Imperium would recognize it. It was something more desperate and more cunning than either. Gretchin are survivors. They exist at the bottom of the Ork hierarchy's sentient strata, and every moment of every day is an exercise in navigating a world that considers them expendable. They are kicked, thrown, shot at for entertainment, and used as living ammunition in shock attack guns. Snickwort had seen a dozen of his peers loaded into one of those horrible devices. He had heard their screams as they were teleported through the warp and into the bodies of enemy soldiers. The screaming, he knew, did not come from the teleportation. It came from what they saw during the teleportation. But here was the thing that disturbed me more than anything. Snickwort did not resent the orcs. Not truly. He feared them. He hated certain individual orcs who had caused him specific pain. But the system, the hierarchy itself, he accepted completely. Of course the orcs were in charge. They were bigger. This was simply how things were. The thought of challenging the fundamental order of orc society never occurred to him. It was not suppressed. It was not forbidden. It simply did not exist as a possibility in his mind. The biggest ruled. The smallest served. This was the way of things, as natural as gravity. Snickwart's daily routine was a masterclass in controlled cowardice. He woke in a cramped, stinking warrens beneath the settlement proper, a tangle of tunnels too small for orc boys to enter. He ate fungal broth and a piece of dried squig meat that he had hidden inside a hollow pipe. He reported to the run herd for his daily assignment, which on this day was ammunition carrying for a mob of boys conducting firing drills. He spent 7 hours carrying crates of crude bolt shells across a muddy compound, dodging cuffs and kicks from bored orcs. And at the end of it, he had stolen 3 teeth from the ground where they had fallen during a fistfight between 2 boys. Teef, the currency of the Orkoid races. And Snickwort had a stash. Hidden deep in his warren, inside a hollowed-out squig skull, he had accumulated 47 teeth. He counted them every night. The counting itself seemed to bring him a satisfaction that bordered on ecstasy. He was, by growth standards, wealthy, and wealth, even in this miserable ecosystem, meant options. It meant purchasing a worn-out slugger from a mech boy's scrap pile. It meant bribing the run herd to assign him to less dangerous duties. It meant a tiny, fragile measure of control in a life defined by its absence. When Vulcan extracted me, I sat in silence for a long time. Morn asked me what was wrong. I told him that I had just spent a day inside a mind that was smarter than most people realized, that lived in perpetual terror, and that found its greatest joy in counting stolen teeth in the dark. He wrote something on his data slate and told me to prepare for the next immersion, the boy. This is where it changed. This is where I first felt the Waaagh. An orc boy stands between 1.5 and 2 meters tall. He weighs anywhere from 100 to 150 kilograms of dense fungoid muscle wrapped in green skin that can turn a knife blade. His bones are thick, his organs are redundant, and his pain threshold is so extraordinarily high that injuries which would kill a human 3 times over are dismissed as minor inconveniences. But I did not feel those things as statistics. I felt them from the inside. The body I was riding was called Grizzguts. He was a member of the Evil Sun's clan, identifiable by the red paint splashed across his crude armor. He stood 1.8 meters. He had a shooter in one hand and a chopper in the other, a brutal cleaver of pig iron and stolen ceramite that he had named Teef Smasher. He had 17 scars on his torso that I could feel as faint ridges under his skin. He was missing his left ear, which had been bitten off by another boy in a dispute over a squig, and he was happy. That was the thing that broke my understanding. I had expected rage, and there was rage, a deep, magmatic heat that sat in the belly like swallowed coals. I had expected aggression, and there was aggression, a constant pressure to hit something, break something, make noise. But underneath it all, suffusing the entire experience like sunlight through stained glass, was a profound, uncomplicated joy. Grizzguts loved being alive. He loved the weight of his shooter. He loved the way his chopper felt when it bit into something solid. He loved the roar of engines, the evil sun's specialty, and the wind against his face when the truck was going fast enough to make his eyes water. He loved the smell of exhaust fumes and burning promethium and the acrid bite of discharged bolt rounds. He loved food. enormous slabs of roasted squig meat that he tore apart with tusks the size of my thumb. He loved fighting, not with the grim determination of an Astartes or the desperate fury of a guardsman, but with the pure, joyful abandon of a child at play. The Waaagh field pulsed through him constantly. It was not a thought. It was not a voice. It was more fundamental than either. It was a feeling, a vibration in the marrow, a subsonic hum that told him where he stood in the hierarchy of his warband, without the need for words or rank insignia. Every orc around him emitted a psychic signature correlated precisely to their size and strength. Grizguts could feel, without looking, that Nob Gutrender was 3 meters to his left, and that Nob Gutrender was bigger than him, and therefore in charge. He could feel that the 22 other boys in his mob were roughly his equal. He could feel, distantly, the massive presence of Warlord Skarfang somewhere in the settlement's central compound, a psychic weight like a mountain on the horizon. This was the genius of the Waaagh field. It eliminated politics. It eliminated ambiguity. You were either bigger or you were not. You were either in charge or you were not. The system was so beautifully simple that it required no administration, no bureaucracy, no ecclesiarchy, no administratum. The biggest orc led, everyone else followed, and everyone was fine with this. I spent 4 days inside Grizguts. I felt him fight in a skirmish against a rival warband that had encroached on Evil Sun's territory. The experience of combat through an orc boy's senses was the single most overwhelming thing I have ever endured. The noise alone, the boys roaring, the shooters firing, the choppers ringing against armor, was so intense that it bypassed hearing and became a physical force, a pressure wave that I felt in my ribcage and my teeth. Grizguts charged into the melee with absolute ecstatic fearlessness. He took a chopper blow to his left shoulder that would have severed a human arm. It cut maybe 3 centimeters into his dense musculature. He barely noticed. He was laughing. The orc boy's experience of the Waaagh was like standing in a river of warm water that was slowly rising. The more boys around him, the more fighting there was, the better everything felt. His reflexes sharpened. His strength surged. His already limited capacity for fear dropped to nothing. I felt the field strengthen in real time as the battle intensified, and I understood, with a horrified clarity, why orc invasions become more dangerous the longer they continue. The Waaagh is a feedback loop. Fighting generates psychic energy. The energy makes the orcs stronger. Stronger orcs fight harder. Harder fighting generates more energy. It just keeps going. It escalates. After the skirmish, Grizguts ate 2 entire squigs, drank a bucket of fungus beer, and fell asleep in a heap with 6 other boys, all of them snoring in a pile like enormous green hounds. His last conscious thought before sleep was not reflection or worry or planning. It was simple, pure, and utterly alien to every human experience I have ever known. That was a good scrap. That was it. Contentment without complication. Joy without consequence. The most emotionally healthy mind I had ever encountered, and it belonged to a Xenos killing machine whose entire civilization was built on the principle that violence is its own reward. Morn told me I was pale when I came out. He said I was smiling. I do not remember smiling. The Ard boy. Morn wanted me to experience this intermediate rank because he said it was the most overlooked position in orc hierarchy analysis. The Ard boy occupies the space between a regular boy and a knob, not yet big enough to command, but tougher than his peers, equipped with heavier armor and meaner weapons, often surviving battles that kill the boys around him. The Ard boy I rode was called Skullcrag. He was 1.9 meters, perhaps 15 kilograms heavier than Grizguts, and he wore heavy armor, thick plates of salvaged metal bolted directly to his body by a mech boy whose craftsmanship was, to put it charitably, enthusiastic rather than precise. 3 of the bolts had gone through Skullcrag's actual flesh and muscle. He did not care, he said, and I translate loosely, that it meant the armor wouldn't come off in a fight. The difference between a boy and an Ard boy was not just physical. There was a shift in consciousness. Skullcrag was aware, in a way that Grizguts was not, of his own trajectory. He knew he was bigger than most boys. He knew he was getting bigger still. He could feel, through the Waaagh field, that his psychic signature was approaching the threshold that would mark him as something more. He did not have the language for ambition. Orcs do not think in terms of career advancement. But there was a pull, a gravitational urge toward becoming the biggest thing in the room. And Skullcrag was getting close. He was meaner than Grizzguts, more calculating. Where a regular boy would charge headlong into any fight, Skullcrag sometimes waited. He watched. He identified which enemy was the most dangerous and went for that one first, not out of strategic brilliance, but out of an instinct that killing the biggest enemy would prove he was worthy of a higher station. He collected trophies, skulls, and helmets and pieces of enemy armor, and hung them from his belt and shoulder plates. Each trophy was a message broadcast through the Waaagh field. I killed something big. I am getting bigger. Respect me or fight me. The other boys in his mob treated him differently. They gave him space. They let him eat first. They did not challenge him for his kit. It was the Waaagh field doing its work. Skullcrag's growing strength was a psychic fact that every orc around him could perceive. Challenging him was possible, but increasingly unwise. And in orc society, where might makes right with absolute sincerity, this meant Skullcrag was ascending. I watched him kill an orc boy who disputed his right to a particularly choice piece of salvage. Skullcrag beat the challenger unconscious with 2 blows of his armored fist, then took the salvage, a Stormboy rocket pack, and threw it to a mech boy for modifications. The beaten boy woke up 20 minutes later, shook his head, and went back to his duties without any apparent resentment. The hierarchy had been tested. The hierarchy had held. Order was maintained. I began to see the terrible efficiency of it. The knob. 47 days into the project. This was the immersion that nearly killed me. A knob is not simply a bigger orc. A knob is a force of nature. The one I was assigned to ride was called Gutrender, the same knob I had sensed from inside Grizzguts' consciousness. He stood 2.3 meters tall. He weighed approximately 230 kilograms. His arms were thicker than my torso. His jaw was a slab of bone and tusk that could bite through sheet metal. He wore armor that was part salvage tank plating, part Xenos hide, and part sheer ego, every surface covered in kill trophies, iron jaws, horned helms, and chains hung with the skulls of enemies. His mind hit me like a fist. Where the boy's consciousness was a warm, joyful current, the knob's was a furnace. The Waaagh energy flowing through Gutrender was concentrated, pressurized, burning. Every thought was louder. Every impulse was stronger. Every sensation was amplified to a degree that made me feel like I was being pinned against a wall by the sheer force of his personality. And there was something new, something the boys did not have: authority. Gutrender did not just feel the Waaagh field, he shaped it. When he roared an order, the boys around him did not obey because they had been trained or disciplined or threatened. They obeyed because his psychic signature compelled obedience. The Waaagh field transmitted his dominance directly into their nervous systems. It was not mind control. It was something more insidious. It was the removal of the option to disobey. When a knob tells you to charge, your body wants to charge. Your muscles want to move. Your throat wants to scream, "Waaagh!" Your conscious mind, such as it is, simply agrees with what your body has already decided. Gutrender managed a retinue of 63 boys, 8 art boys, 4 Gretchin servants, and a terrified mech boy who maintained his personal war gear. He enforced discipline through casual violence that was so routine it had become almost affectionate. A boy who was too slow got a backhand that sent him tumbling. A grot who spilled his fungus beer got kicked across the compound. But there was no malice in it, not truly. Gutrender was not cruel. He was simply expressing his position in the only language orcs understood. Every blow said, "I am bigger. I am in charge." This is how things are. The knob's joys were different from the boys. Grizzguts loved fighting for its own sake. Gutrender loved fighting and winning and being seen to win. He wanted his boys to see him kill the biggest enemy. He wanted the war boss to notice his tallies. He wanted better armor, bigger weapons, the most prominent position in the line of battle. He wanted, in a word, status. This was the first stage of Ork consciousness, where something resembling ambition truly emerged. Not the vague gravitational pull that Skullcrag felt, but a specific, directed desire to be more. And here I discovered something the Ordo Xenos had theorized, but never confirmed. The nob's body was actively responding to his role. His muscles were denser than they had been 6 months prior. His bones were thickening. His jaw was wider. The Waaagh field was not merely psychic. It was biological. The more dominant an Ork became, the more the collective psychic energy of the Waaagh stimulated physical growth. Gretchin was becoming bigger because he was in charge, and he was in charge because he was bigger. Another feedback loop. Another escalation. I spent 8 days inside Gretchin. I witnessed him challenge a rival nob for control of a larger mob. The fight lasted 11 minutes. It involved fists, tusks, a chopper, a headbutt that cracked the rival's skull, and finally a stranglehold that lasted until the rival tapped out by going limp. Gretchin released him. The rival slunk away to a lesser mob. Gretchin absorbed the dead nobs, or rather, the defeated nobs, boys, into his own retinue. His psychic signature swelled. I felt it like a wave of heat. When Vulcan pulled me out, I had bitten through my own lip. My hands were clenched so tight, the knuckles had gone white. My heart rate was 168 beats per minute. "He wants to be war boss," I told Morn. "Yes," Morn said. "They all do. The Meganob." Morn specifically requested this immersion because the Meganob represents something unique in Ork hierarchy. Not a rank precisely, but a status symbol, made flesh and metal. A Meganob is a nob who has acquired, through wealth, violence, or intimidation of a mech boy, a suit of mega armor, the Orkish equivalent of Terminator plate. Massive, clanking, powered by crude piston engines and submotors weighing well over a ton. The Meganob I rode was named Boltjaw. It was a Bad Moon's nob, the wealthiest clan, dripping with teef and golden trinkets, and a suit of mega armor that was part tank hull, part stolen Astartes ceramite, and part sheer belligerence. The suit was covered in glyphs and trophies. His left arm terminated in a massive power claw that crackled with barely contained energy. His right shoulder mounted a twin-linked shooter that a groat crewed from a tiny platform welded to Boltjaw's back. The sensation of being inside a Meganobu was unlike anything I had experienced before. The weight of the armor was immense. Every step was a deliberate act, a piston-driven lurch that shook the ground. Boltjaw could feel the suit around him like a second skin. And the Waaagh field. This is what shocked me. The Waaagh field included the armor. It was not separate from him. The suit worked because Boltjaw believed it worked. The piston engines fired because enough Ork consciousness was invested in the belief that they would. I could feel the reality-warping effect of the Gestalt psychic field humming through every bolt and weld. Boltjaw was insufferable. Where Gutrender's authority was physical and direct, Boltjaw's was ostentatious. He paraded. He stomped through the settlement, making as much noise as possible. He picked fights not because he needed to, but because he wanted everyone to see his mega armor in action. Every kill was a performance. He would grab an enemy, hold them up for the boys to see, then slowly close the power cloud. The crowd would roar, Boltjaw would laugh. A deep, booming sound that vibrated through the suit's fox grill. The Meganob's consciousness was narcissistic in a way that transcended species. He spent significant time thinking about his armor, polishing it, demanding that the mech boy add new plates, new guns, new trophies. He wanted more Daka, more armor, more teef. The Bad Moons were obsessed with wealth, and Boltjaw was the wealthiest nob in his warband. He had so many teeth stored in his personal compound that he had hired 8 Gretchin just to count them. But here is what I found fascinating. Despite the armor, despite the wealth, despite the strutting arrogance, Boltjaw was still subordinate to his war boss. The mega armor made him one of the most individually powerful orcs in the warband, but the war boss's psychic signature still dwarfed his. Size mattered more than technology. Always. The hierarchy held. The War Boss. 91 days. Morn told me this immersion would be the most dangerous. He was right, but not for the reasons he expected. The War Boss was called Skarfang. He was evil sons. He stood 2.7 meters tall in his boots, which were themselves welded to a crude exoskeletal frame that boosted his already absurd strength. He weighed somewhere north of 300 kilograms. His skin was darker than the boy's, a deep forest green, scarred and tattooed and branded with clan glyphs. His lower jaw jutted forward to accommodate tusks the length of combat knives. His power claw, a gift from his big mech, could crush a rhino's hull. He was magnificent. I hate that I thought that. I hate that it is true. Entering Skarfang's consciousness was like stepping into the eye of a hurricane. The Waaagh energy that flowed through a boy was a trickle compared to this. Through the War Boss, the field was a torrent. He could feel every orc in his warband, not individually, not by name, but as a collective weight, a green pressure that pushed against his mind and fed him. 12,000 boys, 800 knobs, 43 vehicles, 11 def dreads, 2 stompas under construction. He felt them all, and they felt him. The War Boss's mind was not what I expected. Yes, there was rage, there was the ever-present joy of violence, but there was also something that I can only describe, and Morn did not believe me when I told him, as vision. Skarfang was not merely reacting to the world around him, he was planning. Not in the way an imperial general plans, with maps and logistics and supply lines, but in a way that was no less effective. He could feel, through the Waaagh field, where the fighting was strongest. He could sense the direction of his next target, a nearby hive world that his freebooter allies had identified. He was marshalling his forces, not through orders and communiques, but through the sheer gravitational pull of his psychic presence. The orcs did not need to be told where to go. They were drawn to him, and through him, to the fight. Every orc is the same, Skarfang thought. And I heard it, felt it as clearly as if he had spoken aloud. Every orc wants a scrap. Da War Boss is da one who knows where da best scrap is. This was orc leadership, not strategy, not tactics. Instinct weaponized on a civilizational scale. The War Boss's role was to be the strongest, yes, but also to be the one who could channel the Waaagh energy most effectively. To be the lens that focused the green tide. Every boy who looked at Skarfang did not see a commander. He saw a promise. The promise that the fighting would be good. The promise that the loot would be plentiful. The promise that the Waaagh would continue. Skarfang was challenged twice during my 8 days inside his mind. The first challenger was a knob who had grown too big for his station. Skarfang killed him in 4 seconds. He did not even use his claw. He headbutted the knob so hard that the knob's skull caved in. The second challenger was more serious, a rival war boss from a neighboring tribe who had come to test his strength. This fight lasted nearly an hour. It was brutal beyond description. I will not recount the details. I will only say that Skarfang won by tearing off his opponent's arm and beating him with it until he stopped moving. The defeated war boss's entire tribe, some 4,000 boys, immediately swore allegiance to Skarfang. There was no negotiation, no treaty, no formal surrender. The defeated tribe simply became part of Skarfang's Waaagh. Their knobs fell into line. Their boys merged with Skarfang's mobs. It was instantaneous and absolute. The Waaagh field made it so. The biggest orc won. The hierarchy reorganized itself in minutes. Skarfang's warband had just grown by 1/3. I could feel the Waaagh energy surge like a tide coming in. Skarfang was bigger now. Not physically. Not yet, though that would come. But psychically. His presence in the field swelled. He was becoming something more than a war boss. He was becoming a warlord. The Warlord. 137 days. Morn almost cancelled this immersion. The previous session had left me with nosebleeds that lasted 9 hours and a persistent visual disturbance, a faint green shimmer at the edges of my vision that the Medicae could not explain. But I insisted. I needed to see the top. By the time I was immersed again, Skarfang had conquered 3 more tribes. His Waaagh now numbered somewhere in the region of 40,000 orcs. He had a fleet of 12 cruisers and 4 rocks, hollowed-out asteroids fitted with engines and guns. He had a retinue of meganobes, each one a walking tank. He had big mechs building a stomper that was being upgraded to gargant specifications, a walking cathedral of scrap metal, and firepower standing 60 meters tall. And his mind had changed. The Warlord's consciousness was not simply a larger version of the war bosses. It was qualitatively different. The Waaagh energy flowing through Skarfang now was so intense that it had begun to alter his physiology in ways that went beyond simple growth. His skin had thickened to a hide that could turn a last gunshot. New muscle fibers had grown across his shoulders and back. His cognitive capacity had expanded. He was thinking in longer chains, anticipating enemy movements across entire star systems. The Adeptus Mechanicus had theorized this effect, the Waaagh stimulating latent genetic potential in dominant orcs, and I was experiencing it from inside. But it was not intelligence as humans understand it. Skarfang did not suddenly develop an appreciation for art or philosophy. His enhanced cognition was entirely directed toward warfare. He could manage the logistics of a multi-system campaign. He could coordinate fleet actions with ground assaults. He could identify strategic targets and allocate resources to exploit them. He did all of this through the Waaagh field, through a combination of psychic intuition and a biological imperative so deep that it felt like instinct wearing the mask of genius. And something else had happened. The other orcs had started calling him something new. Not war boss, not big boss. Prophet. Gork and Mork is watching, Skarfang said. And when he said it, the Waaagh field rippled. Every orc within psychic range felt it. A shiver, a tremor, a sense that the twin gods of the Orkoid race, Gork the brutal and Mork the cunning, had turned their gaze upon this particular gathering of green. The distinction barely mattered, for Gork was brutally cunning, and Mork was cunningly brutal, or perhaps it was the other way around. No orc could agree, but they could all agree on what it felt like when the gods were watching. It felt like hunger, like the universe itself was getting ready for a meal. This is the stage of orc hierarchy that the Ordo Xenos fears most, not the individual warlord, though individual warlords can be devastating. The fear is the momentum. A Waaagh at this scale becomes self-sustaining. It draws in orcs from neighboring systems. Freebooters abandon their independence and flock to the banner. Feral orcs on primitive worlds feel the psychic call and begin building spacecraft from whatever materials they can find. Speed freaks race toward the sound of distant explosions. The Waaagh becomes a gravity well, and the warlord at its center becomes something that is very, very hard to stop. Skarfang launched his Waaagh on the 142nd day of my involvement. I was still inside his mind when the fleet entered the warp. I felt the Waaagh field interact with the Immaterium, and for one terrible moment, I was aware of something looking back. Not the Emperor, not the Chaos Gods. Something older, something green, something that grinned with a mouth that had no face. Gork, or Mork, I still do not know which. It did not speak, it laughed, and every orc in the fleet laughed with it. Vulcan pulled me out. I was told later that I had been screaming, that my eyes had turned green for approximately 11 seconds, that the psi-dampening walls of Laboratory 7 had developed cracks. I sat in my cell for 3 days. I did not speak. I could not, because I had seen the full architecture of Orc society from its lowest worm to its towering apex, and I understood something that I wish I did not. They are perfect, not morally, not aesthetically, not by any standard that the Imperium would recognize, but functionally. The Orkoid ecosystem is the most efficient civilizational structure in the galaxy. It produces exactly what it needs, when it needs it. Snotlings to tend the fungus, Gretchin to maintain the infrastructure, boys to fight, knobs to lead, war bosses to direct, warlords to unite. Every role is filled automatically through biology and the Waaagh field. Without training, without education, without bureaucracy, without the 10,000 inefficiencies that plague the Imperium's every endeavor. An Ork is born knowing what it is. An Ork never questions its purpose. An Ork never suffers an existential crisis. The Imperium spends trillions of throne geld and uncountable human lives maintaining a civilization that is perpetually on the verge of collapse. The Orks achieve the same result, with spores and punching. I understand now why the Ordo Xenos classifies the Orks as the single greatest long-term threat to the Imperium, not the Tyrannids, whose hunger can be predicted, not chaos, whose corruption can be resisted. The Orks, because they are everywhere, because they cannot be eradicated, because every world that has ever been touched by an Ork invasion carries their spores in its soil for centuries, because their civilization requires no maintenance, because their technology works through belief, because their hierarchy is self-correcting, self-sustaining, and self-escalating, and because, Emperor, forgive me, they are happy. Every Ork, at every level of the hierarchy, from the lowliest Snotling to the mightiest Warlord, is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The Snotling tends its fungus and does not dream of more. The Grot counts its teef and considers itself rich. The boy fights and laughs. The Nob dominates and grows. The Warboss conquers and leads. The Warlord unites and ascends. There is no dissonance, no alienation, no gap between purpose and existence. They are the only species in the galaxy that has achieved what the Emperor promised humanity and never delivered: unity, purpose, joy, and they did it by being green and hitting things. Morn has classified my testimony as Vermilion level restricted. He says the philosophical implications are too dangerous for wider dissemination. He says that if the ecclesiarchy learned that a Xenos race had achieved a more complete form of existential contentment than the Emperor's own species, it would constitute a heresy of the highest order. He is probably right, but I know what I felt. I know what it was like. Every rung, every rank, from the warm dark of the spawning pit to the burning green summit where the gods themselves look down and laugh. I was there, inside it, all of it. And the worst part, the part I will never tell Morn, the part I will never write in any official report, I miss it. I miss the simplicity. I miss the certainty. I miss the feeling of 40,000 minds all pointed in the same direction, all wanting the same thing, all singing the same wordless, roaring, triumphant song. Waaagh! I can still hear it. I will always hear it.